Most of you are probably aware that of what the FOIA is. Again, it's the Freedom of Information Act. Um, it started back in the late 1960s at the federal level, and then was enacted here in Virginia in 1968. So what does it do? Well, the gist of it is that it gives access to public records, and this can be public bodies, officials, and employees. And then sometimes people ask, well, what can you get hold of? And the answer is a whole lot of stuff. It's any writing or recording. It can be paper, electronic, audio, video, even text messages. So that gives you an idea of the scope of information that people can go after when they're, trying to open up issues. And another thing to keep in mind is that it's a lot of different entities that you can FOIA. Just for example, I'm going to show you a little bit more, but you can go after the local governments, Williamsburg, James City County, York County. Colleges, public colleges and universities are also subject to FOIA rules. The public library, the public school system, the bus system, the trash system, municipal water system, so on and so forth. Now, they do have the ability to restrict some of that information, and these are the common exemptions that they will use. You see, it's pretty robust, and so it typically revolves. Obviously, some of them make a lot of sense. Employee records, benefit information, salary, sometimes legal proceedings, even things that are contracts that are still being negotiated. Those things are frequently withheld, and really most likely for a good reason. But there are instances where people in certain positions of authority within the government are using some of these exemptions pretty broadly. And I'll just point to an article that was written by the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. They published this a while back, specifically about how officials here in Virginia, what they say, misuse working papers exemption to shield records. So what is the working papers exemption? It's also sometimes called the executive exemption, loosely, but basically it allows an executive or such in an organization, usually the top of the organization, to protect documents and so on and so forth that they're using within their deliberation process. One caveat to that is supposed to be that it hasn't been shared externally outside the organization, but generally gives the ability to restrict access to that person's public and otherwise public information, their public dealings. So for example, I wrote this piece a little while back in February, one of my first couple months on the job here, and just an example of what Williamsburg is doing. They've basically decided to exempt most communications or documents related to or from the city manager. And in fact, I was able to get this little piece, which does confirm that the city does not disclose the city manager's correspondence during his time serving as the city manager. Okay, so that kind of works back to what is necessary and what isn't necessary to protect. In a lot of cases, they can release as much from whatever they want to. There's no, in some situations there are restrictions, but in other cases it's up to them what they want to release, what they want to provide. So something like a blanket denial of information is what many would consider to be somewhat of an extreme reaction to people providing oversight to government activities. I'd say beyond just like what they're willing to provide, another big hindrance for news organizations, especially smaller independent news organizations, is the cost that goes into it. There's another piece I wrote early on, just kind of detailing some of the costs that it goes into getting this information. I think the most expensive one I've been asked to pay was like around $600, and I'm not totally sure who that was. Now, sometimes they are able to and willing to provide information for free, and that's nice. Typically, if you ask for contracts or something that's they don't have, they usually won't charge you for that. But if you want them to start doing some work, they have the right to charge you reasonable fees for their time and effort, and so that's when you start to get into the gray area of what's reasonable. But it does provide a roadblock for news organizations trying to get hold of information. Even large organizations can run up against this when they're trying to get large amounts of information to take a look at. So that being said, I wanted to just kind of dive into what some options are here locally. And I think that one of the best examples of what's possible is York County. They have their online portal here, which you can see. And then they have all of the FOIA requests totally public. So, for example, I made a FOIA request. Here's yours truly back in August. And what I asked for was information related to permits for large cruise ships to come and to port there at Yorktown. It was an ordinance passed earlier this year, I suppose, when the Board of Supervisors said, okay, well, we might allow some of these large cruise ships to come up and visit, but they're going to have to get a special use permit before they're allowed to do that. So that's a step that a cruise line would have to start to deliberate on if they wanted to start coming to Yorktown after all. And so how they responded, you could see they put this up there, and this is available for every FOIA request going back. You see somewhere around 675 is this particular record. And one thing I did notice is like that's enough to keep somebody busy for sure. You can see how many they're dealing with. So, but back to the one that I filed, you can see that they said the records you requested do not exist when I asked for any documentation or communication regarding the special use permit for the cruise ship docking here. So fortunately, they did not charge me for this. So thank you, York County, for that. This is the article I wrote after getting that information. So sometimes finding out something didn't happen is still worth knowing. Okay, just an example here. This is James City County and their portal. They have a nice portal. William and Mary has a portal. School system has a portal. Williamsburg, no portal, but you can work through them through email, and they're very responsive. They do take the time that they need and can use to respond, but the email works just fine. So just wanted to dive into a few of my greatest hits here over the past few months. This was particularly fun regarding the children's park with a water feature is actually what they prefer to have it called. So that's what they plan or had planned there in a portion of Williamsburg in this pretty field here. So I'd actually put in a FOIA request to get information about it, and I had a big back and forth about what information they would provide. Um, anyway, I think this one caught people's attention, and I wrote this because I believe that the information should have been provided to me, and instead it became an issue of semantics. And so, uh, city people have the right to make those decisions, but at the end of the day, openness is the best policy. Another FOIA, this one was interesting. This was based on people's complaints about certain areas where they're having property code violations. And so I FOIA'd the records and was able to put together a heat map, which indicates those different colors of intensity of activity, and kind of confirm that, yeah, indeed, there were certain areas that were experiencing more property code violations, and also identifying who those were, which was interesting information to a lot of people. So that was all FOIA information. Travel to go research the new music live performance venue, potentially, that was undisclosed. Undisclosed coordination between the city government and College of William and Mary on what information would be released in response to FOIA requests. Not my FOIA request, by the way, somebody else's. Let's see, just a tidbit here about new development that someone wants to do, a hotel and a bunch of houses here at the corner of Penniman and Page. That was FOIA. Interest in the city-owned land at Strawberry Plains. That caused a lot of contention the first time around, but looks like developers are still interested in it.